Good afternoon and good morning from Australia, from Tim Crowe for this Facebook Live session on Build Up Dietitians page. So I'm just going to take things quite slowly to start with, just to let a few people join into the feed rather than just me sitting here talking by myself. So I might just pause just for a minute and have a coffee because it is 6 a.m. on Saturday morning here in Melbourne. So it's a little bit early, but I'll get things going pretty soon. So thank you already for some people joining in, which is great. There is an audience out there, which is wonderful. And I'll try and monitor the comments box while I do this. So please, by all means, just add some comments in, who you are, where you're from, what sort of practice that you're doing, just to get a bit of an idea about the audience that's joining in. So a little bit about me and my background. So I'm I call myself a career scientific nerd. I've been in the area of nutrition research most of my career. So about 30 years of medical and nutrition research. I've also trained as a dietitian, so I have spent some time in the world of clinical dietetics, mostly in the field of oncology, which I really loved. But by far, most of my career has been in, g'day Leah, thanks, good to see you joining. Most of my career has been in the world of academia, so at Deakin University here in Melbourne, teaching into nutrition and dietetics. The last 3 years though, I left the academic world behind and I've been working as a freelance health and medical writer. So I really immerse myself in the space of nutrition communication. I work with the media, I do a lot of work on social media, I do a lot of health writing, I do consulting work. So all of the nutrition things I've built up over my career, I'm now making my own job out of it. But firmly, my career has been in research. It's to do with evidence, it's actually doing the research, and increasingly now it's communicating the research, which is really what the theme of today I wanted to cover, which is about effective communication. And I think that's something we all deal with in this field. We've got all this great nutrition knowledge, but how do we communicate that to the public? How do we understand and interpret the research? How do we work our way through the fads and the facts and the fallacies and make it understandable for us, but also for the public? And that's the sort of stuff I want to cover today. So it'd be great for those of you that have joined in, just say a quick hello and where you're from, just to get things going and let me warm up a little bit. And again, it's still 6 a.m. and then I'll launch into a few things I wanted to cover today for this session. So I've got a few people online. Whereabouts are you from? I imagine most of you from the United States. What part of the States are people from? From nowhere. All right, we've got 4 people on. Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Awesome. All from the States. So that's wonderful. What's the dietetics landscape in Australia compared to America? Well, I haven't worked in America. I have colleagues that have trained in Australia and also have worked as RDs in America. And really, things aren't that different. Nutrition is nutrition no matter where you study in the world. And Australia is really dealing with very similar issues to America. We've got issues of chronic disease, of overweight and obesity, type 2 diabetes, and a lot of that is to do with our diet. So an Australian diet, a typical Australian diet, is very similar to a typical American diet. It's high in too much overly processed food, a lot of added sugar. No one eats anywhere near the recommended amounts of foods promoted in dietary guidelines, and yet they continue to get blamed for all of our health problems, as I'm sure you hear that as well. So it's actually, the Australian diet is not that wonderful. It's always an aspirational goal to be eating better. But overall, our food systems, our health issues, are fairly similar to America, which is, makes it easy to understand the research as well. I should just mention at the beginning also my social pages. So obviously I'm very active on social media. I have my Thinking Nutrition website, which is thinkingnutrition.com.au. Also very active on Facebook as Thinking Nutrition, on Twitter as Crowe Tim, on Instagram as Doc Tim Crowe, that's DOC Tim Crowe, and increasingly, which has been my main source of communication in the last year or so, it's podcasting. So I started a podcast in January of last year, and it's been going really well. I've put out weekly episodes, and the episodes cover all of the things I'm asked about the most, and probably the things that are most topical and interesting. So I've got 71 episodes out there, covering things such as, is soy good or bad, the role of protein supplements, sports nutrition. I've done some stuff on ketogenic diets and cancer, all sorts of different episodes. And since launch, it's been in the top 10 of nutrition podcasts in Australia on the Apple charts. So it's going really well. I think it's ranked in about 150 in the US charts for nutrition. So it's my main form of communication these days. So if you were looking for a good nutrition science-based podcast with no ads, no product promotion, and just getting down to the facts of research and communicating it, then probably my podcast has you covered. So by all means, check out Thinking Nutrition Podcast from wherever you get your pods. Okay, so what do I want to cover today? There's a few things I had on my list. So I mentioned that my background has firmly been research. And one thing I wanted to, awesome, thank you for that link there. Yep, that's my podcast. So that's my website, thinkingnutrition.com.au. All my podcasts are on there if you want to listen to on a web browser, or else you can just grab it from your podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for that. I appreciate that you enjoy it. And yes, I do keep it down to about 15 minutes. No waffling, no inane chat with guests, because I don't have guests. I just do it as me. And the reason why I just do a solo presenter podcast is that I've spent most of my career in nutrition science. I've got a good understanding of most of the fields of nutrition, and I'm all about communicating it in a clear manner. So I just get down straight to the important bits. So with nutrition science, I both love and I hate nutrition. I use that in a bit of a joke, because nutrition is one of the few professions where you can be considered an expert simply because you eat. Simply because you've eaten in a certain way and you've got some results from it. Either you've lost some weight, you've improved your blood sugars, whatever. And because of that, you can create a powerful story and a powerful narrative about your own particular health journey. So you've had a health issue, you've had something you're battling with, you've changed your diet, and all of a sudden you've got the answer, you've got the solution. You know how everything should be treated and how everyone should eat. And of course, you write a book, you get followers on Instagram, and you communicate your message. You can do all of that without studying a single bit of nutrition, because you've got a powerful story about nutrition. So in our profession, that is what we're dealing with quite a lot as professionals. We immerse ourselves in the science, and sure, the science is not always the best quality science, but we try and make the most of the science that we've got. But we're combating a lot of people who are pushing their own particular agendas with their alternative view of nutrition. Now, in all fields of science, there are competing views about theories and how things should be done. Nutrition is no different. That is normal. What is different is that some of the voices that are given a lot of time actually have no background at all in nutrition. And yet their voice and their weight can be held in very much high esteem. And that is because of everybody eats. Everybody eats food. That food affects everybody differently. So how do we combat this as professionals? So this is sort of my little tip list of how to go about it, and where you sit in this world of nutrition confusion and nutrition facts, fads, and fallacies. And I wanted to start that even though as dietitians we say we're evidence-based, the evidence for many things we do is not that solid. Now, I have no agenda here, but when you look at decades and decades of research in nutrition, a lot of the things we do is going to be based upon observational research, which has its own inherent flaws. And we don't always have lots of randomized controlled trials to make decisions. So while we always should be as evidence-based as possible, that doesn't mean that the evidence is solid for everything we do. So one thing that's changed in my career over the years is I hold on to the evidence base a little bit looser. It doesn't mean I do my own thing, but I acknowledge that not everything is solid, not everything is certain. And there is certainly some scope for some personal experience, because food affects everybody differently. So just because you've got a randomized controlled trial and a meta-analysis saying that a particular food will do this to your blood sugar, or that it will have no effect for weight loss, for an individual, that may not be true. And one of the most powerful things I ever came across was when I was reading a randomized controlled trial years ago. And what they did was they got every single data point, every patient or every person in that trial, and it was a weight loss trial, and they ranked them from people that lost the most weight to the person that gained the most weight. So they put them as individual points. And what you could see was that even though the means and the standard deviations didn't differ between different diets, at an individual level, there were people that lost lots of weight and people that gained lots of weight. And they're the powerful stories that we hear about when people talk about their own particular nutrition theories and ideologies. But also in those clinical trials, just because you've got randomized controlled trial evidence and even meta-analysis evidence, at an individual level, there are people in there that did have different experiences. And that was a big revelation in my career, that rather than try and fight the fads and what I consider misinformation with my randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses and position statements, I still use those, they're still valid, but I acknowledge there is some scope that they may be applied in different ways. Take the different diet fads that come and go. I've been in nutrition for almost 30 years. I've seen low carb be reinvented as Atkins to low carb. Now it's keto. Before it was keto, it was paleo. It'll morph into something else. Now, rather than try and fight against those fads, what I suggest is that you roll with them, because in 6 months' time, no one is doing true keto. They'll be on to the next dietary paradigm that will, change their life and give them more energy and give them limitless weight loss. What I focus on is, rather than an ideal diet I believe everyone should follow, we'll call it dietary guidelines, which are guidelines, not rules. What I believe is that most of these diets, when you look at them, they have a similar message. They generally advise eating a lot less highly processed food, having a lot less added sugar, and then they differ around the edges, whether it should be cutting out carbs completely, cutting out grains, just going vegetarian, eating like a Mediterranean. They all differ in that, but the core of them is quite similar. And for most people, when they follow them, it probably means they're eating better. So bear in mind, the typical Western diet is the typical US diet and the typical Australian diet, which is pretty poor. In Australia, only 6% of people eat the recommended amount of vegetables each day. While dietary guidelines talk about having whole grains, only a third of the grains people eat in Australia are whole grains. So for most people, even following on these popular diets, it actually means they're eating better. And now if they're eating better, that's a positive, regardless of the fact that in a couple of months' time, they'll probably start reverting back to the mean, back to their normal diet. So with all the different diets, rather than believe that this is the particular way to eat, or the evidence says this, acknowledge that there can be a diversity of ways to eat healthy, to look at what the fundamental core nutrition evidence does say. And in my career, I've yet to see anything to say that a diet that's mostly plant-based, that's in as close to its natural form as possible, that if it includes some animal foods, maybe not a lot of red meat, but otherwise, if you want to have dairy, if you want to have fish, you want to have chicken, go for it. The people pushing harm about those foods, typically are coming from a vegan agenda. I'm using some very cherry-picked research. But, get the core basics of a mostly plant-based diet. If you want to go vegetarian, that's fantastic. You don't need to be vegetarian to be healthy. That is most of the battle. That is most of what I consider healthy eating. If most people got that right, they'd be looking, tracking pretty well for their health. So when you're communicating nutrition, it's important to be evidence-based. It's important to look at the research, but have in mind that that's the sort of person that's actually behind it. That's the sort of person that, will take your advice or health advice and apply it in their own particular way. And then when you're talking to the public, we like to hedge our bets as evidence-based dietitians. We like to use words such as, there's an association between this food and this health aspect. Or we say, there's not enough evidence, we need more research in this particular area. One thing the health gurus do pretty well is they're very solid in their facts. They'll say straight out that this food is toxic or you need to cut out gluten. Now, I'm not saying we need to adopt a similar approach, but being a bit more black and white in your language and giving some clear recommendations for people. Just because a single research study finds that, for example, the Mediterranean diet lowers the risk of dementia. Maybe we need more research. But overall, is there anything inherently wrong with eating a diet that's similar to a Mediterranean-style diet, or a diet that's similar to a traditional Japanese diet, or a diet that's similar to pretty much any traditional diet because they are all healthy. It's not like the Mediterranean diet's the best diet out there. It's just the best research diet. Overall, is this research promoting a healthier way of eating? And if the answer is yes, well, that's going to be a good thing for the public. And while we need more research, if we use the Mediterranean diet for example, there's already lots of good research that's going to be of benefit, so you're not doing anything inherently wrong. Also, we love to talk about facts and figures and percentages and heaven forbid, p-values. But sometimes anecdotes work really well. So if you're talking about a particular diet and research, you can use a fictional patient that you've seen, just an amalgam of different types of patients you've seen or people, as your own little case studies, a little fact to put in there when you're talking through social media or through the media about someone's experience on eating in a particular way, what sort of benefits they got from it. And also speaking in a very common language. So how I write, how I speak to the public is very sometimes colloquial types of language. I try and avoid using the words such as associations. I use the word links. I never talk about someone's intake. It's, they eat food. There are different sort of ways that you can, just play with language just to be seen as more human. I'm just going to read this comment here. Many ideas need some of these fed diets. Yes, absolutely. Carnivore diet. For my own mental health, I've stopped having knee-jerk reactions to the latest fad diet. I've seen way too many come over the decades. So rather than fight them, I just roll with them, knowing that not many people will be following them to the letter of the law. Generally, more new grads, when you get out, you're full of energy and passion. You want to change the world and fight the fads and correct all the myths. That's great initially, but you can't keep that energy up for your whole entire career. So overall, a lot of the fads that they just come in cycles. So rather than be reactive and being negative about it, a consistent thing I do when I speak to the media about the latest, fad diet is look at some positives of it. And there will always be some positives, maybe except the carnivore diet. That's just way out there. That's one of the most extreme diets I've come across. I did a podcast on the carnivore diet. I can't find anything positive to say about it. I gave a rating of 1 star out of 5, maybe 0 stars out of 5 would be more appropriate. But with that as one of the few exceptions, most diets will fit on a spectrum that you could say some positive things about it that would be beneficial. Some crazy diets I've seen over my time, and this would be one for you to join in, some of the craziest diets you've seen. The one that I rank as my number one crazy diet ever is the Eat Right for Your Blood Type diet, which is just a made-up crazy diet put together by a naturopath who sold several million copies of the books, mind you, with no real evidence, no putting their own money back into doing some research in it. Basically the sorts of food you choose is based upon your ABO blood type. If you're one particular blood type, you eat mostly vegetarian. If you're another one, it's a mixed diet. If it's another, it's a more low carb. That's it. So all it is a diet that fits in the classic paradigm of a list of rules to follow and giving you a reason for why you've got health problems because it's your blood type. It's crazy. There's just crazy science behind it. There's actually been one research study that's looked at it, and of course it found no difference between people's blood types and their ability to gain or lose weight. And chimpanzees, apes, they are very similar to us genetically, and they also have an ABO blood type. And guess what? They all eat the same food. So it's just a stupid diet. That's crazy. The problem with these sorts of diets is that it just puts a distorted view of science in someone's mind. It's saying that someone's blood type is responsible for their health or their weight gain, or just saying that it's the fact that someone eats grains or it's gluten that's causing other problems, or it's the latest bugbear of lectin. So it's giving demonizing a particular food or nutrient, and that can create an unhealthy relationship with food. So that is one of the big issues with the fads that come and go. It's the distorted view of people can have of what may be considered, good or healthy nutrition. So the blood type diet I rank as my crazy one. I'm just wondering for anyone else, what sort of fad do you consider one of the most extreme ones that you've come across that you are continually fighting against, or you just in the end just roll your eyes at? Not much out there. I think you probably deal with the same ones as we do here in Australia. And I mentioned low carb because that's just been around for decades and decades. It just gets reinvented and reinvented under different names. So raw foods, raw foods is an interesting one. It's a classic that the premise for it is just crazy. You have to eat raw foods so your body can digest it and get all the enzymes and nutrients out of it, which is crazy. In fact, cooking food can increase the absorption of some nutrients. It makes food safer. Whether you cook foods or don't cook foods, it's not a big deal. But what raw food diet does is it limits your food, the amount of food you eat. It promotes a plant-based diet. So guess what? People generally feel better for it. Is it sustainable? Absolutely not. It's a very sad long-term diet if you've just adopted it because someone told you that you have to eat food raw all the time. So it really limits your food variety that you can have. So yeah, raw foods is a popular one. I actually wrote an article for The Conversation a couple of years ago on raw foods, and I got called out for saying that a raw food diet can be anything that's raw. There are people that consider a raw food diet as eating sashimi, so having raw fish or raw meat, and they said no, a raw food diet is a plant-based diet, as if the raw food diet is owned by the vegan establishment. So you have these food debates in the food world as well, whereas I just looked at it from a science perspective that you can eat anything food raw if it's not processed. So that's a popular one. Probably the common things that I see over my career, and generally I do podcasts about most of these because they're the things that I come across the most. It's going to be, soy is the most toxic food that you can ever eat. That's what the internet tells you. And science tells you something different. Another one is probably gluten. This sort of comes into and out of popularity as a really bad food to be having. What other things do I sort of see? Sugar comes and goes out of popularity for being a food to demonise or not. We eat way too much added sugar. But when you look at the solid research, overall, all sugar does is adds extra energy to the diet, and it increases the palatability of food. All this demonising that it was said to do, really it's not supported by much research at all, particularly the research about fructose. So I'm just reading this comment here. That's an article about people eating raw chicken. Oh my God, who'd want to eat raw chicken? That just sounds like a food poisoning disaster waiting to happen. Are there issues with influencers being listened to on social media? Absolutely. There are all sorts of crazy influencers on social media. Some really dangerous ones, just giving some not only poor advice, but really terrible advice, premised with the fact that that you can't trust the science, you can't trust dietitians, that they've got their own particular views on things. So yeah, the influencers are a very powerful voice, which can be used for good and for evil. It's nice to see some pushback against them, but overall, if you've got a following of several million people, then your message is quite powerful, and you can be held in fairly high regard just because you're talking about nutrition, that you've got your own particular journey, your own particular experience with eating food. So what final things I want to cover over? So just to probably finishing up as we're getting near the end, I want to give you my tips of how to sort of keep up with the latest research, because maybe you don't have the luxury to always be out there doing research yourself or doing loads of literature searches for every big problem that comes through. So here's my tips on how to communicate nutrition science and keep up with the best research. Overall, fortunately, we're seeing more and more systematic literature reviews and meta-analyses published. So these are, I consider, that the highest quality evidence. Of course, they are the highest quality evidence. There is a danger, of course, if you do meta-analyses or SLRs with slightly different methodology, you'll get some slightly different answers. And we've seen that in the case of saturated fat and heart disease. But overall, when you're looking for evidence, yes, it's great to look at individual research, but no one single study is definitive. Go for a SLR and a meta-analysis if you can, if it's got the meta-analysis built in, as probably the highest evidence to use in citing a particular issue or communicating science. They're the best ones to go for. If you don't subscribe to electronic table of contents for the main journals of interest to you, you should sign up for them. Just scanning the table of contents as a new journal comes out, be it the Journal of the Nutrition Academy of Dietetics, AJCN, EGCN, Nutrition Reviews, a couple of others you could add in there. And if you don't read all the articles, just reading the titles and the odd abstract will help keep you up to date in a huge range of particular areas. So I subscribe to about 20 different journals as far as getting their electronic table of contents. That may be a bit excessive for some, but all that happens is an email comes through In about 1 or 2 minutes, you've scanned the whole table of contents. And that just gives you a feel, keeps your finger on the pulse for what's happening out there in the nutrition world. So that's a great way just to keep up to date. Another one is Pub Crawler. So you'd all know PubMed. There is a spin-off from that called Pub Crawler, which is linked to it, where you can put in your own keyword searches for things of interest to you. And then every week you just get an update of the latest research published in that particular area. So you'll all be familiar with doing a lit search where you just look at all the literature. With Pub Crawler, you just get up-to-date research in that week that's come out. So obviously keywords of interest to you, carnivore diet or eating disorders, whatever area is an ongoing area of interest. And then every week you get updates. So that ensures you get the latest research in particular hobby pertinent areas of interest to you. So you have to keep the keywords manageable. Generally, the keywords I use mean I get 40 or 50 searches a week of areas of interest to me. So it can be any keyword you want to use. Probably the best website on the internet for nutrition, I'll get to that question in a minute, for nutrition evidence-based information is examine.com. If you haven't used it, it's just wonderful. It is written by a team of nutrition researchers that they have a subscription-based model, although they have a lot of free content. There's no advertising on it. They deep dive into nutrition research. So if you've never been to the examine.com website, check it out. It is a wealth of information. And for a small, if you want to subscribe to their digest, it's well worth it. It's a site that I use even as a career nutrition researcher. It's well worth using. What's been the most popular, highest viewed podcast? Relative to the following count I had at the time, my most popular podcast has been collagen supplements. They are huge. I was quite skeptical about them at the time. When I delved into the research, and there's been about a dozen RCTs published, it's actually positive. There's actually some reasonable evidence that collagen supplements may have some benefits for skin health and may help with joint health as well. So collagen supplements have been the hugest because everyone's been interested in them. So again, my podcast is Thinking Nutrition, and you can just grab that from anywhere. Oh, awesome. You have a discount for Examine on your website. Yeah, wonderful. So for anyone that hasn't heard of Examine, go to it and subscribe. It is the best resource to keep up to date. They do all the hard work of critical analysis for you. The other thing, another tool I use quite a lot is Google Trends. Google Trends is one of the best ways to keep on top of the fads and to see how they've changed over time. It's great if you put the paleo diet in Google Trends. Here I'm drawing the graph. You'll see a big spike in about 2013, and then it's just tailed off to nothing. And yet, if you then overlay it with keto, you see keto starting to take off as paleo started to decline in interest. So Google Trends is awesome for determining why you're seeing a lot of interest in a particular diet. Like intermittent fasting, it's been a big spike in interest since Michael Mosley's documentary, Eat, Fast, Live, in, I think it was 2015, 16 or something, or maybe a little bit earlier. And you can track that in Google Trends. Carnivore diet, you can see a huge spike in interest the very day that Joe Rogan did his big Instagram post of all the weight loss he lost from 30 days of carnivore diet. So Google Trends is awesome for keeping up with the vox pops of what people are into. Twitter is really good. Twitter is useful if you follow good people on there who are nutrition researchers. They put out lots of information. I've heard Twitter described as 1 part learning, 1 part entertainment, 1 part socialization, and 1 part arguing with dipshits. And that's a good way of describing what Twitter's like. Twitter is probably one of my most useful nutrition science communication tools. So while I post a little bit, I use it to curate because I follow good people who are good nutrition researchers, and they post lots of useful information. So, if you want to make use of Twitter for positive uses for your career, follow people in your field, people of interest to you, who generally mostly communicate about nutrition science or things of interest rather than just what they've had for breakfast or their political views, whatever, which is fine. You can use Twitter for that, but you can curate a particular feed of nutrition researchers. So overall, it's using SLRs, setting up electronic table of contents, using Pub Crawler for your weekly search alerts, examine.com, awesome resource, Google Trends, and Twitter. So they are my main resources and suggestions for keeping up with the latest developments. And of course, you can follow me through my social media channels. I live and breathe nutrition research. So that's thinkingnutrition.com.au, Instagram, Doc Tim Crowe, that's DOC Tim Crowe. On Twitter, Crow Tim. and of course my podcast, Thinking Nutrition. So I'm very easy to stalk and track down on social media, and I'd love to connect with you in the future. So that's it. It's now 6:30 a.m. I'm going to have another coffee and go out for a morning run here in Melbourne. Fortunately, we're not in lockdown, at least this week. That could always change next week. So thank you to Leah and the team for having me on the Facebook Live for Build Up Dietitians. I've been following this page for many, many years, and I really enjoy it for the evidence-based stand for science approach that it has. So thank you, and everybody have a great weekend. See you.